this visit with the foreign minister, Chinese foreign minister's visit to India, I know they didn't really deeply speak about the border, and Chinese kind of expressed their desire to move forward. But Chinese, how they are, they don't really usually spell things out that clearly. Do you think there's a chance that they will take into consideration Jaishankar's kind of pushing and standing on this issue, and there will be a far more structured conversation? Right now it's happening on the more military to military level on the border. They've had several meetings to talk about how to manage this border thing. But do you think it will go to a state level dialogue on peace talks on the border between China and India after this visit?
I think China broke something with what they did on the Indian side in terms of the outlook on that relationship that doesn't get patched up again, because so I think there's certain things there that are not retrievable, and there's an orientation on the Indian side which really has been, we have to further rethink, having already gone through everything that they've gone through, we have to rethink the state of this bilateral relationship and what China, as far as they're concerned, is willing to do now means. Because if we can't manage these things through these old mechanisms, if there are points in which China...
And especially when their bilateral trade has risen so much in the previous years. I mean, that whole equation where you have strong trade relations, I mean, so you protect each other on the security front, that, it doesn't really, countries that have very strong interdependent trade relations don't really go to wars. This was this whole equation. And yet with India, China, it had a very healthy rising bilateral trade figures, and then suddenly...
But I mean, I think the trade thing is contentious because as far as India is concerned as well on this, what would they like to be selling? What is the...
that's the issue with China all through,
Yeah, I mean, there's everyone...
Trade imbalance, it's a trade imbalance.
There's those concerns, and then I think what you also saw playing out in the last few years was the trust question goes into some of the investments, and particularly on the digital side. I mean, of course, one of the first responses was the app ban, and I think there's been a sort of...
spying through the digital.
And I mean, China had a very big presence in financing a lot of Indian tech companies. It's very active there. It was one of the only other really consumer-facing markets where Chinese or Chinese apps had been as popular on as big a scale. China was in play for India's 5G networks. I mean, and I think a lot of that has gone. And that there's a zone of what the digital relationship looks like, which has again been really affected by the actions that China took. And it's a very different thing to be just trading goods versus that level of presence in
sophisticated
countries' data, all of these things. And again, I think that's not something that will go
reverse. That will not.
That's done as well. So I think there are going to be limited areas in which the two sides can work together. Afghanistan is an area where China's been relatively sympathetic to Indian involvement. There's been for all the concerns here and the willingness to kind of mirror those positions, the instinct on the Chinese side has been, if it helps, if it doesn't kind of blow things up with Pakistan, then India's involvement is fine, might be helpful if there's some economic commitments they can make. And so I mean that's been true throughout. There is a question of, you may have some thoughts on the India-Taliban interactions. I'd be curious if you've had any sense of what the thinking is on the Taliban side as well on that question. But I mean, there is just what does India's relationship with Afghanistan look like in the next period?
Yeah, I think from what we've seen as far as Taliban's own statements, and they were kind of like highlighted here, obviously anything they say about India and how that plays out always gets highlighted here. From what we've seen for now, they've made very positive statements, very kind of there's absolutely no kind of a referral back about India's role in the Ghani government or the previous administrations, and they have tried to kind of place it very clearly as far as the Pakistani audience is concerned, that they don't per se, they want to have friendly relations, they don't see India as an enemy, they do not see that their relations necessarily have to be placed on what Pakistan has experienced with India, and they don't want to share that. So as far as the statements are concerned, are quite, I think, quite positive. But again, they wouldn't want to jump into this without Pakistan leading on this issue. And practically speaking, what we saw even with the Ghani government and others, without bringing Pakistan into this equation, because my lens is always geopolitical, I come down to the geophysical. Without Pakistan coming into that play where we open land borders for direct India-Afghanistan trade, whether it was during the last 20 years of Ghani government. I mean, India could only do that ingress because on the backs of the U.S. military presence, highly costly. It wasn't a cost-effective investment in Afghanistan. Then they tried to have these air corridors to increase trade. It's like, kind of going around your head to hold your ear. It is something that they can, because India is a big power. India is economically very strong. They can sustain it, but it's not a very sustainable, healthy type of, unless Pakistan steps in, unless Pakistan allows that opening of land borders, unless Pakistan kind of steps in to allow major investments in infrastructure that India can make inside Afghanistan, which will facilitate road links, other links where India can access Central Asian markets through land, which should be, this is how this region needs to flow. When Pakistan talks about geoeconomics, I can't see that whole geoeconomic angle moving forward unless we allow this space opening for India and back and forth, for Pakistan into India and India through Pakistan into Central Asia, and create that economies of scale here, which need to happen. So my, kind of like the wildest hope that I have in that as Pakistan kind of course, the insecurity with TTP and terrorism and attacks inside Pakistan territory remains as far as Afghanistan is concerned. On that front, Pakistan's military, as we talked yesterday also, we are losing our soldiers every day in attacks. Last 6 months or so, we've lost about close to 80 or 90 of our soldiers in these attacks across. So on a narrow thing, that security issue for Pakistan is alive, but that broader strategic sense of encirclement, which we had in the last 20 years of US presence there, and then India kind of being parachuted in over Pakistan despite Pakistan's objections into creating that space. And in the initial years, I think Indians were also a little bit too kind of adventurous of how they positioned and what they were trying to do, and that insecurity, that is over. Afghanistan now with the Taliban have that government where no matter what you say, no matter how much we fight on the border over the fence and them breaking down, there is a level of trust between the two. That's 100% there. That is a sense that I get from when I talk to people from Afghanistan, and to talk to our own people, especially the ones who live on the border, especially those tribes and those political actors, both in KP and Balochistan, who have been players in this war last 20-25 years. They feel that that there is less of that friction with the Taliban, and that Taliban eventually, no matter what you say, will not want to do things that are against Pakistan's interests. They do look at Pakistan as a country that has been supportive of that organization and will continue to play that role. So I think that Pakistan should have more confidence in giving that space to India, because it is in the benefits and it fits into our larger policy or strategy of geoeconomics that we love talking about. But practically, unless we do these things, it's just hot air and talk.
I mean, it looks. I mean, when you do the budget estimates on CPEC, including land trade, there are various things on the cross-border side that are almost economically non-viable unless you have India in play as well.
Absolutely.
And this was always the thing on the kind of planning, and all of this would look very different then. And so there's a kind of, if any progress is made on these, it has a catalytic effect in other areas, and in a context in which in the end a CPEC that is just straight line between already developed areas. Quad are in a difficult spot at the moment. Something's kind of stalling. That does not look like the connectivity vehicle.
No.
Whereas it looks different if you have the East-West piece in different ways.
Yeah.
And of course, in slightly different context, Iran, if the nuclear deal is agreed.